Welcome back to Banjo Strings and Anvil Rings. If you haven't listened to chapters 1 and 2 yet, you might want to start there. Otherwise, get comfortable and let's continue the journey. Chapter 3. Elizabeth. The soft glow of summer morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, illuminating the modest but well-kept kitchen of the Whitfield home. The wood-paneled walls bore the marks of a house well lived in, their grooves smoothed over by time and care. Elizabeth Whitfield moved with purpose, her petite frame bustling between the stove and the table. Barely 5 feet tall, she was a striking figure with her fiery red hair twisted into a neat bun and her sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Though small in stature, Elizabeth carried an air of authority that could silence even the towering Andrew with a single glance. The aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the rich, earthy scent of brewing coffee and the faint tang of iron wafting from the forge outside. Elizabeth's hands, calloused from years of cooking, cleaning, and running the household finances, worked swiftly as she kneaded dough for the next loaf. She hummed to him softly, the familiar melody soothing her nerves like a prayer whispered into the mountains. Through the window above the sink, the rolling hills and valleys of West Virginia unfolded like a patchwork quilt, stitched together by ribbons of misty streams and dense forests. The rising sun set the dew-covered grass alight, its brilliance contrasting with the dark outline of the forge where Andrew and their sons worked. Andrew's hulking figure, all 6'4" of him, moved with the practiced precision of a man who had spent decades bending iron to his will. His dark brown hair, streaked with silver, caught the light as he barked instructions to Early. Early stood closest to the fire, his broad shoulders flexing as he swung the hammer in measured rhythm. His dark hair was damp with sweat, and his expression was one of intense focus, his blue eyes reflecting the orange glow of the forge. Nearby, Curly inspected a wagon axle, his curly hair falling into his face as he worked. His banjo, always within arm's reach, rested on a stool nearby. Elizabeth paused for a moment, her hands still on the dough, as she watched her family. A pang of both pride and worry tugged at her heart. Early, with his steadfast dedication, often carried more than his fair share of the burden. And Curly, her charming, carefree eldest, seemed to dance through life, though she knew his lightheartedness often masked insecurities he'd never admit to. The screen door creaked open, snapping Elizabeth out of her thoughts. Andrew's imposing frame filled the doorway, and despite his gruff exterior, the corners of his mouth twitched into a faint smile when his eyes met hers. "They're working hard this morning," he said, setting his tools on the counter as he reached for a cup of coffee. "They are," Elizabeth replied, wiping her hands on her apron and gesturing toward the table. "Sit, Andrew. Breakfast is ready." Andrew sat heavily, the chair groaning under his weight. He took a sip of coffee, his dark eyes scanning the room as if assessing the day ahead. "Curly's mind seems halfway to tonight's dance," Andrew muttered, his tone a mix of exasperation and amusement. Elizabeth placed a plate of biscuits before him, her expression firm but kind. "He'll finish his work, Andrew. He always does, even if he takes his time. And don't forget, his music brings joy to this town. It's as much a part of him as your strength is of you." Andrew grunted, though the tension in his shoulders eased. "I just don't want him coasting through life. It's a hard world out there, Lizzie. He needs to be ready for it." Elizabeth crossed the room, resting a hand on Andrew's massive shoulder. Though her fingers were small and weathered, they held a quiet strength. "He's a Whitfield, Andrew. He'll find his way, just like Early has. And they'll both have each other to lean on when the time comes." As if on cue, the door burst open, and Early strode in, his boots leaving dusty prints on the floor. He nodded a quick greeting to his parents, his movements efficient as he grabbed a biscuit and poured a glass of water. "Morning, Ma." "Pa," Early said, his voice calm and steady. He took a bite of the biscuit, chewing thoughtfully before glancing out the window. "Forge is running hot today. We'll have those horseshoes done by noon." Elizabeth smiled, her pride in him evident. "Just don't work yourself too hard, Early. You've got a dance to play at tonight." "I'll manage," Early replied, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Curly's the one who'll be needing a break after dragging that banjo around all night. Andrew chuckled, a rare sound that filled the kitchen like a low rumble of thunder. A moment later, Curly appeared, his grin as wide as the holler outside their home. "You all talking about me again?" he asked, snagging a biscuit from the plate. Elizabeth folded her arms, her sharp eyes softening as she took in her eldest son. "Always, Curly. Though it's usually about how to keep you out of trouble." Curly laughed, tossing the biscuit in the air and catching it with a flourish. "Trouble? Me? Never." The laughter in the room eased the morning's weight, and for a brief moment, Elizabeth allowed herself to feel the peace that came with these small, shared moments. As her sons headed back to the forge, their banter echoing in the yard, Elizabeth turned to Andrew. "They'll be fine," Andrew said, his tone quiet but sure. Elizabeth nodded, her hands still dusted with flour. "I know. They've got the best of both of us in them. It just takes time for them to figure it out." Andrew reached for her hand, squeezing it briefly before standing to return to the forge. Elizabeth watched him go, her heart full. The hills outside shimmered in the golden light of the sun, the streams winding like silver threads through the valleys. This land, rugged and unforgiving, mirrored her family in many ways. It was resilient, enduring, and filled with a beauty that demanded to be appreciated. As she returned to her work, Elizabeth sent up a silent prayer. For her sons, for her husband, and for the strength to keep them all moving forward, one day at a time. Elizabeth rarely spoke of the children she had lost. The tiny graves on the hill beyond the orchard were a quiet testament to the years of sorrow she had endured. She had buried more of her children than she could bear to count, each one slipping away before they could grow old enough to face the world as adults. But Early and Curly had survived, the last of her children, and because of that, she could not bring herself to deny them much of anything. Let them play their music, let them roam the hills. She would not be the one to clip their wings. It was love, yes, but also a bargain with the past. If she could not protect the ones who had gone, she would at least soften the world for the ones who remained. That was Chapter 3 of Banjo Strings and Anvil Rings. The past lingers in Elizabeth's heart, shaping the future of her sons. But what happens when the world calls them forward? Stick around for Chapter 4, coming soon. If you love storytelling and history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a chapter. See you next time.